I'm happy to present to you this work created in collaboration with Thomas Michel, Gauthier Amon, Clément Moulafrier, and Pietro. The motivation of this paper comes from a widely discussed concept in artificial life, the concept of open-ended evolution. And although it doesn't have an agreed-upon definition, it is typically regarded as a process which can endlessly produce novel and increasingly complex structures. And the primary example of such a process is natural evolution on Earth. And in the field of artificial life, one of the key questions or goals is how can we bootstrap artificial open-ended evolution? What are the necessary conditions for it to occur? And working towards creating such a system is intriguing because it could help us better understand our world, and we could also benefit from the products of such a system, similarly how we benefit and learn from the process of natural evolution. And open-ended evolution has been studied in a wide variety of systems, for example in lab experiments, symbolic artificial chemistry, cellular automata, and so on. And in this work we focus on cellular automata, so we try to tackle the question of bootstrapping artificial open-ended evolution in cellular automata. And one of the most famous examples of cellular automata is the Conway's Game of Life. And the dynamics of this system and cellular automata in general can be described by their state, which is typically a 2D grid of cells, and an update rule, which determines how the grid evolves in the next time step. And in cellular automata, this update rule is local, meaning that each cell is updated based on its surrounding cells. And although Game of Life has a very simple kind of rule, it can still generate quite complex patterns. And over the course of years, people have found more and more complex patterns in this system. For example, there is the glider gun in the middle and this spaceship on the right. More recently, cellular automata with continuous states and update rules have been designed, and here most famously there is Lenia, in which the state consists of a real valued number between 0 and 1, and at each iteration the current state AT is passed through a convolution kernel and a nonlinear growth function, resulting in an intermediate array UT, and a small portion of this intermediate array is added to the current state to get the next state. And Lenia introduces many kinds of parameters which can change the effect of various components of the system. And one of these sets of parameters is Game of Life. So Lenia is essentially a generalization of Game of Life. And for example, the rule of Lenia that we see below leads to interesting lifelike smooth patterns that we see here. And over the course of the years and in the initial work of Bert Chen, many different kinds of patterns have been identified in different regions of this vast parameter space of Lenia. One of the current challenges of Lenia and many cellular automata in studying open-ended evolution is that they typically do not allow for different types of creatures in the same world. And to study open-ended evolution, ideally we would like a system where many kinds of creatures can emerge in the same world, and they can coexist and interact with each other. And this is where Flow-Lenia enters. So Flow-Lenia is an augmented version of Lenia that has the property of mass conservation and parameter localization. In other words, the sum of the CA grid does not change over time, and also a single simulation can support multiple update rules, which results in simulation where there are many different kinds of spatially localized patterns. Excuse me. In the original Lenia, as I said, the intermediate state UT is directly added to the current state AT to get the next state. And whereas in Flow-Lenia, the UT represents a kind of a flow field which is used to push the mass around the grid. And this is done with a method called reintegration tracking. And it also allows us to track mass as it moves around. And this enables us to attach various information to this moving mass. And one of these such information could be update rules. So essentially we can attach specific update rules to different mass cells, making it behave like a specific chemical or something of that kind. We can further introduce random mutation elements during the rollout and add some kind of crossover or competition whenever masses with distinct update rules collide. And with these mechanisms, Flow-Lenia becomes a very expressive system where local parameters can compete and adapt for mass in order to survive or perish. And large Flow-Lenia simulations look like mini ecosystems with many patterns resembling various microscopic phenomena. And now a natural question arises: how can we search for simulations where increasingly complex ecosystem-like behavior occurs? And more generally, how can we search for interesting patterns in cellular automata? Traditionally, this was done with manual tuning and random search methods. And although these methods have some drawbacks, they have been successfully used in Game of Life for 50 years to find increasingly complex and interesting patterns. For example, manual tuning methods have the drawback of needing extensive human effort, whereas random search methods might have a hard time hitting the interesting parameters, regions in the parameter space. More recently, diversity search algorithms have started to be utilized, and unlike direct optimization algorithms, which aim to find the best parameters according to some fitness function, diversity search algorithms seek to discover a wide variety of behavior. And many kinds of these algorithms exist. For example, there is novelty search, quality diversity, and autotelic AI. In this work, we focus on intrinsically motivated goal exploration processes. So how do this work? Imagine that you want to do some experiment or run multiple experiments. Well, typically, you first need to choose some kind of parameters that will be used to launch your experiment. These are our parameter space theta. Once we have those, we can perform an experimental rollout and get raw observations. And from these raw observations, we extract relevant features to get a representation in our behavior space. And this behavior space is the features that we care about. And typically, diversity search algorithms, they try to find, they try to maximize the coverage in this behavior space. Specifically, how do ImJobs do it? Well, they start with some initial set of samples. Then they sample a point in the behavior space, the red X, and then they find the closest neighbor to this point. After that, they trace back its initial parameters, they mutate them, then the experimental rollout is conducted with these new parameters, and we get a new point in the behavior space. And this whole loop is repeated many times to form the full ImJob algorithm. And these methods have been shown to explore complex systems in a wide variety of behavioral spaces much more efficiently than random search methods. For our specific experiments, we consider the parameter space to include the convolution kernels, growth function parameters, initial local rules, and various environmental factors of Flow-Lenia, such as the mutation rate. We collect the raw states in intermediate and the final time steps of the rollout. And from those, we extract a variety of measures, such as the MP4 file size as a proxy for visual and algorithmic complexity. Also, multi-scale entropy, which quantifies matter distribution at various scales. And we measure non-neutral evolutionary activity, which essentially quantifies how do the local update parameters evolve over time. And here we can see a typical initial state and the resulting final state. Once we run our IMJEP algorithm, on this slide we can see a wide variety of behavior that we have found. So we can see quite static, repetitive dynamics, some dynamics where different local update parameters join to create a macrostructure. And there are some other more chaotic systems, as you will see here. So again, on the left, there is a rather static system. In the middle, we see some structures, macrostructures being formed. And on the right, there is a very chaotic system. And when we look at the diversity found compared to random search, we see that IMJEP seems to find much more diversity in the behavior space compared to random search across all the dimensions of the behavior space. And when we look at some metrics over time as the experiment is being conducted, we see that IMJEP finds that IMJEP has an larger average pairwise distance and also a larger grid coverage compared to random search. And we see also that it seems to continue exploring even after 12,000 trials. We conduct one more experiment where we look at how matter can move in Flow-Lenia in constrained environments. And here we have the same parameter space and the same observation space as before, but we change the behavior space to simply just include the center of mass in the final state. And here is how a typical initial state looks. We initialize all the matter in the top left corner, and we add these walls represented in gray color. And here are some typical behavior that we find. Some patterns result in rather cohesive structures, whereas others seem to kind of split and diffuse over multiple rooms. And we also see how different kinds of behavior can be a consequence of a parameter mutating. And again, we compute the coverage and cumulative coverage, so of the IMJEP algorithm and random search. And again, we show how IMJEP seems to more efficiently explore this behavior space. Finally, we also release a visualization tool where you can find the trials that the IMJEP algorithm has found. In this visualization tool, you can launch the videos and download the parameters in order to reproduce the experiments. And finally, for potential future work, we would like to develop methods to characterize the resulting dynamics more rigorously. Currently, most of the analysis has been qualitative. And here we wonder, could we use maybe methods from ecology to start studying systems like Flow-Lenia? Specifically, how could we detect different species is an open question. And also it would be quite interesting to increase the size and the duration of the simulated environments, and also to test the algorithm on different behavioral spaces. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Pietro, and in this talk I'm going to discuss about differentiable logic cellular automata, work done in collaboration with Eivind Nicholson, Ettore Randazzo, and Alexander Morvintsev from the Google Pi team. So before digging into the technical aspects of this model, I think it is worth to spend a couple of minutes to fully understand what is the context and the motivation that led us to this work. And to fully grasp it, I think it's important to understand what the Google Pi team does in general. And the best way to do it is to read this article written by Blaise, who is leading the team. And I think this really summarizes what is the overall mission of the team. I won't go in all the details of the article. I won't summarize all the article, but the key idea is that with all these the recent advances in AI, I think we are being pushed to rethink what intelligence itself really is, and to understand AI and like intelligence more broadly. We have to move beyond this narrow, like human-centric view and embrace different paradigm shift to fully understand intelligence. And two of these paradigm shifts are natural computation. So investigating how nature performs computation. So, and this is in the view that intelligence isn't exclusively human, but is like embedded in nature itself. And then there is collective intelligence, and I think this paradigm is really like close to the ALIFE community in general. And it is the idea that intelligence doesn't just reside in isolated individuals, but is also like an emerging property that can emerge from groups, networks, and ecosystems. And it was exactly by having like these two concepts in our mind that these two paradigms in mind that we got interested in the concept of computronium. For the one that doesn't know, computronium is a term that was proposed, or programmable matter was a term that was proposed in 1991 by Tommaso Toffoli and Norman Margolis from MIT, in which they describe this idealized medium that can be reprogrammed at the atomic scale to perform any computation. And in describing how this material it works, they gives like they talk about, they focused on three key properties, three key specific aspects. The first aspect is that this material need to be like composed by a lot of tiny submodules, subcomponents that are like spatially organized, and these components need to communicate to each other, and the communication need to be local. These two guarantee robustness and scalability. And once you put like these two aspects together, then also complex global behavior arises from these local rules and local interactions. And I think nowadays in research, there are different threads that can embody this concept. Like if you think about synthetic biology, for example, or microfabrication. But at that time, the closest application to this, closest implementation of computronium was actually a cellular automata machine they themselves developed in the 1991. So a cellular automata machine is a really specific hardware to implement cellular automata rules extremely efficiently. And as you can see from the image, this machine was composed by a lot of submodules, spatially organized, and the communication between them was only possible between local submodules. And each submodule was consisting on one DRAM that was containing cell states, and the SRAMs, which was containing the lookup table to compute the new cell states, basically. And with this machine, they were able to perform a lot of simulations, like fluid dynamic simulations and statistical mechanics simulations. But scientists already at the time realized that the key bottleneck of this approach is that in order to be able to program this machine, you need to be aware what are the local rules of the phenomena that you want to simulate. And this is extremely hard to do. So the phenomena that you can simulate are like a very few, and it's very hard to reverse engineer local rules from global behavior. And then at this point, we start wondering, what if 30 plus years later, we now are able to build a learnable cellular automata machine? And it was by having this question in our mind that we started thinking, okay, what does exist already in literature? And of course, NCA already embodied this concept of computronium, because you have a lot of spatially organized units and you have local interactions. But the problem of NCA is that they still perform at floating point operation, and the abstraction from hardware is still quite high. And we really wanted to have this software and hardware like co-evolve to create this learnable cellular automata machine. And for this reason, we need to have like an additional component. And we have it by introducing this like additional architecture that was proposed quite recently of deep logic gate networks. And it was exactly by this intersection that we created differentiable logic cellular automata. Regarding NCA, I think I can assume that most of the people that are probably will watch this recording are already familiar with it. But just to give a very quick recap, NCA are like a type of models proposed in the 2020 by Alex Morbintsev, Ether Ratzavi Nicholson, and Professor Michael Levin that combines the idea of cellular automata with neural networks. So instead of handcrafting rules, each cell has a tiny neural network that learns how to update the state using information from its neighbors. And the key thing that I want to focus on and will be reused later is the fact that in NCA the computation happens in two steps. In the first step, you have each cell that is grasping information, gathering information from the environment. And then there is the update step in which all this information plus the information of the previous state is processed with a neural network to compute the update of the cell state. But maybe not all of you are familiar with the concept of deep differentiable logic gate networks. So this architecture was proposed in 2022 by Felix Petersen, and is an architecture that resembles quite a lot neural network, where you have a layer structure network and computation happens in a feed-forward manner. So you have the input on one side, and then information flow through the network, and then you have the output computing on the other side of the network. And then learning happens with backpropagation. But there are two key differences compared to standard NNs. One difference regards the topology of the network. So in standard NNs, you have each neuron that takes as input all the input from the previous layer, usually. In this case, each node of the network only takes in inputs two input from the previous layer. And then there is a semantic difference. So what each node in the lecture is actually doing. In the case of NNs, each neuron is basically computing a weighted sum plus the activation function. In the case of deep logic, each node is computing a Boolean operation. And the key point is, okay, which Boolean operation each node needs to perform. And this is exactly what learning really is in deep differentiable logic gate networks. So the problem is, okay, which logic gate each neuron needs to perform, each node needs to perform. So for two inputs and one output, there are 16 possible overall choices of truth tables, so of gates that are possible. And this is modeled and parameterized with a 16-dimensional vector that you can see here and noted as W. And when this vector is, when you apply softmax to it, then this vector basically becomes a probability distribution of picking one of the 16 possible logic gates. But we're still not done. So we're still not done yet. And because Boolean operations per se are non-differentiable. And so how Petersen solved this problem in his papers by proposing and considering during training a continuous relaxation of each gate. And so the output of one single node is during training is just the expected value computed as the continuous relaxation of each Boolean operation weighted by its probability distribution. And then the magic happens. So basically during training for each node, we are solving a classification problem. And during training, this probability distribution converges for each node to a sort of delta distribution that is focused on one specific gate. And then if you have this, at inference, you can just ignore all the other gates that are not considered and only consider the gate that has maximum probability, which means that you can replace each node as just a gate with maximum probability and then doing all the computation in the discrete space, in Boolean, pure Boolean space. And basically that's it. So what we did in our work, we replaced all the continuous operation in CA with deep logic networks. So we starting from convolutions, and for convolution we design a specifically connected circuit that resembles the interaction of the central cell with the neighboring cell, and then we replace the update circuit to compute the new cell state. Here I'm reporting a little bit more in detail how these two circuits are designed, but I think most of you are interested in the results. So the first task that we tried was Game of Life. So Game of Life was the ideal sanity check test that we wanted to do because, first of all, we know the updating rules, and second, because the system is memoryless in the sense that if you know the state of the cell, which is only 1 bit at the current state, then you can compute the next cell state immediately. And so we tried it, and we were able to figure out what was the circuit that is basically implementing the Game of Life rules. And this is reported here on the right, and it's a circuit of almost 350 gates. So this is far from optimal. But I want to say that we didn't optimize for circuit size. So there is nothing really embedded in the architecture. This forcing, for example, the network to reduce the number of gates. But this is definitely like an interesting direction to push in the future. But okay, we managed to do it. But what about a task that we don't know the updating rules? And for doing this, we tried this checkerboard pattern, this 2x2 checkerboard pattern. This is probably one of the easiest the easiest pattern that you can try. But we don't know the updating rules. And we're able to get there with a circuit of only 6 gates. And the remarkable thing about these six gate circuits is that it was able to generalize pretty nicely. So it was able to reconstruct the pattern even in a bigger box. But also it was able to self-heal, in the sense that here in this animation, you can see a box that is at the center. Some cells were deactivated. And you can see the circuit is able to reconstruct the pattern despite the damage. And also to, once this cell are reactivated, is able to self-heal. And so reconstruct the pattern that was in the middle. And also then we try to train another diff logic CA, but with asynchronous, trained asynchronously. So instead of updating all the cell at the same time, only 60% of the cells were updated. In this case, we got a slightly larger circuit, but showed more robust behavior for this noisy, when this noisy perturbation were applied. Then we tried also a little bit more complex patterns, like for example, the standard outline of the lizard, that was the icon of the growing NCA paper, and then this color G logo and the color version of the checkerboard, in which we consider the last 3 bit basically of the cell state to be the RGB channel. And here's the code that you can play with and do all the experiments. And with this recap of my of the talk of today, I would like to thank you, and then I think I will open the discussion, and I'm open to answer any questions that you have.
Hi ALIFE community, my name is Sina Khajehabdollahi, and today I'll be presenting our project titled Expedition and Expansion, Leveraging Semantic Representations for Goal-Directed Exploration in Continuous Cellular Automata. Now, the goal of this project is relatively straightforward. We just want to come up with some type of exploration algorithm that automates the exploration of some complex model in a semantically grounded way. And the idea behind this is that by semantically grounding our type of exploration and our definitions of novelty, that we can get novelty that we actually care about, that matches our own perceptual definitions of novelty. Now, the ALIFE community is no stranger to the work on novelty search over the past few years. Many from this community have contributed to it. The work on novelty search, on stuff like map elites and quality diversity have defined sort of more objective free, semi-objective free definitions of optimization, which I believe give rise to more invariant manifolds for optimization algorithms to be able to descend on. And there's been a lot of efficacy shown to having exploration, or rather optimization, that is not just myopic in its goal to solve a single problem, but rather has an exploratory sort of nature to it. Now, the problem one faces very quickly when trying to implement a novelty search algorithm for their own model is how to define the behavioral search space. Now, there's two main categories that you can go to solve this problem. The first is to have handcrafted features, and the second is to have some kind of unsupervised algorithm. Now, sometimes you can't have handcrafted features if your system is truly open-ended in some way. For example, in the case of cellular automata, it might not be obvious what our features ought to be. But in other cases, they might be very obvious, and sometimes they're obvious, but they're hard to quantify. So, for example, if I say I want all possible snowflakes, how do I quantify every kind of variation of snowflake and be able to classify this? So this is where we think that the idea of using foundation models, which are explicitly shaped by human semantics, just because of the way that they're trained, that these definitions or these behavioral spaces can be much more aligned with our perception. And then the second question in a novelty search algorithm is how to actually navigate that search space. So most novelty search algorithms kind of diffuse and expand an archive into this behavioral space. It depends, though. You can force them to explore in certain directions. However, we think that a more principled way to do this navigation is to once again use foundation models and things like vision language models or multimodal language models to generate goals within context of the past explorations of the archive. And this way we can have an online goal setting that can be very adaptive. So what are the two different ways that we can use these foundation models? So one way is to use these image text shared embeddings, which kind of they arise in models like OpenAI's CLIP, which is trained to basically match the right captions for a given image. And so there is a shared embedding space as a result of the way that they train these models, such that both images and texts can be embedded into this 512 dimensional vector. And then we can do things like compute their cosine similarity just to see if they align or not. And so this can be used as a loss function, among other things. Another way that we can use foundation models is in the context of something of more of a larger context window with like language models, large language models. And here, this is just an example of a sort of a conversation where I'm feeding multiple images to the model and I'm asking it to caption it. And this is all within the same kind of combo. So there is a long form memory to it. And we can use this to plan goals and do other things depending on how you prompt the language model. And there's a lot of precedent to this work. One of the first inspirations from a few years ago, this is certainly not the only one, is the self-organizing textures project, which has been presented at ALIFE as well at some point, or at least referenced on multiple occasions. And this paper used the features from VGG, I believe 16 or 19, which is just a very large vision model, and they use these features to compute losses for targets. And this was very successful. I think it was one of the first times where it was very clear to me, at least, that using pre-trained large models for training secondary, potentially smaller models is very powerful. There's also a lot of work on unsupervised exploration with these hierarchies of autoencoders, or using autoencoders and quality diversity. This actually starts to get very similar to what we do here, although they don't use foundation models, they use autoencoders, but this kind of similar spirit. And then lastly, the paper this year that came out by Akash on automating the search for artificial life, or ASAL. This was a fantastic paper. This is very similar in spirit to what we did. Yeah, they very clearly showed that optimizing towards targets inside the embedding spaces of foundation models is extremely powerful. So the way that our paper kind of differs from these ones is that we still use the embedding spaces from foundation models. We think this is a very bright future in this direction. But what we also combine this with is with adaptive goal generation using long form like LLMs or VLMs. The model that we choose to do our exploration in is Flow-Lenia. This is because cellular automata in general seem to be extremely expressive and open-ended. I'm not sure if there's what the bounds of expressiveness in these models could be, and I guess the whole point of this project was trying to see if we can figure out just how expressive they can be. We have about 225 parameters that we're exploring, and these parameters control the kernels and growth functions and different flow hyperparameters of Lenia. The way our search algorithm works is we first initialize the archive with a bunch of random sets of parameters, about 1,000. We simulate these Flow-Lenia parameter sets for about 500 time steps. We take the last frame from these simulations and we put them through CLIPS image embedding to extract a 512 dimensional embedding vector. These embedding vectors, along with the parameters, are saved in the archive, and we do this for every new sample or artifact that we generate. And then we generate new artifacts in two ways: via expansion, which is akin to sort of a more traditional novelty search, and expedition, which is expensive because it's an optimization process, and so we do this every k steps. Expansion, the way that it works is that we look at the archive, we compute the novelty of a sample within the archive by looking at its mean k nearest neighbor cosine distances. So basically how similar is it to its k nearest neighbors? And we mutate stochastically around the high novelty artifacts. So we pick the high novelty artifacts stochastically rather. And the bias in which that we sample high novelty things, artifacts, is with this parameter alpha, which actually turns out to be quite an important parameter to tune. Going on to expedition, the way that this works is that we set a goal, we embed the goal using clip again, and we then find the nearest sample or artifact within the archive and attempt to optimize towards the goal using CMAES. It should be mentioned that actually achieving the goal is quite rare and not necessary. It's often enough to just run the optimization process, which already pushes the boundaries of the archive to be bigger. The way we generate the goals is using this contextualized goal generation. We use a VLM, we use O4 Mini specifically, which is a multimodal language model. And what we pass to it every step, or every expedition step, is we give it 25 of the highest novelty samples from the archive. And we force a chain of thought on these images, which is to come up with what it finds similar across the images, what it finds unique, what it thinks is in the adjacent possible or the reachable novelty. So what's right on the periphery and not too far away. It's got to be feasible. And then we ask it to generate a goal after this sort of chain of thought. So in doing so, we run some simulations. The first simulation, which I'll show, is without any expedition. This is only the expansion. So here, what we're doing is we're running it with different biases on alpha. When alpha is 0, this is completely random. We're randomly selecting from the archive and mutating. So there's no novelty search here. And when it's 9, this is just a very large number. That means there's a very strong bias towards always picking the most novel samples from the archive. And the way we compute the diversity here, this is the clip diversity. We just average over the k nearest neighbor distances for everything in the archive. So in the top row, we do this with clip embeddings. In the bottom row, we use Dino embeddings. Dino is another model similar to clip. However, it's not trained with text labels. It's purely unsupervised as far as I understand. And so we can't do text-based sort of training with it or get a loss from it, but we can use it to do evaluation when it comes to the novelty. And so what we find is actually when alpha is too big, for example, on this line here with alpha equals 9, the novelty actually stalls. And when we look at the dyno embeddings, actually the novelty decreases. So this kind of hints that if the bias is too strong, you can kind of get stuck. And this is maybe kind of hacking into clips perceptual blind spots somehow. So actually, I'm not sure if I fully understand what alpha equals 9 gets stuck on, but it's clear that alpha equals 4 from our results is the hyperparameter that we should be using. In the next result, we introduce expedition with a frequency of every 50 up to 300 steps. And our results are relatively intuitive. As the frequency of expedition increases, the diversity of the archive grows more. There are diminishing returns when we compare between 50 and 100, for example, although this does show a little bit more novelty when we look at dyno. So maybe there is still a difference, but there are diminishing returns. And so because this is an expensive part of our process, we will try to find the largest period that we can get away with. Putting it all together, when we take our best results from expedition and expansion, our best results from expansion only, and a couple baselines using random GA or just completely random search, we find that our method, expedition and expansion, is the most performant. We can then look at some of the results of direct optimization. After all, this is a very image-centric project, so it would be nice to show some images. Here's a couple cool ones that where I believe that the optimization was successful or the expedition was successful. This is the one I already showed earlier, a photo of a DNA double helix, and the different columns are different points during the optimization step. So we can see that at the beginning, it does not resemble a DNA helix or anything like that, but by the end, it's maybe kind of looks like 2 chromosomes. It's pretty cool. And yeah, so these are some other examples. This is a microscopic image of neurons is the caption, and this one maybe you don't see it under my image, but it's a topographic map. We can now look at the archive as a whole using UMAP to project our embedding space down to 2 dimensions. So it's a 512 dimensional vector, but with UMAP we can get it down to 2 and see the different clusters that have developed throughout the course of the exploration. The important thing that I want to point out is that the red stars are the different expedition goals, or rather the expedition results that we have, and the orange or yellow are expansion only. It's an expansion only run, so there was no expedition for this experiment. And what we see is that while the expansion only it fills up this kind of main body volume, the expedition runs are the only ones that really push into these new spaces over here. And this is just a couple examples. Number 1 here, this was a goal of a pink square, and then the blue dots around it are expansions around it. And we can see how there's some interesting variations developing over here using this pink color, which we found was quite rare given our setup. So once we had seeded one example of this in the archive, then it could use it to mutate around that. And you can see these islands or archipelagos or whatever kind of form of behavior. And then what was also kind of funny was this, I call this the graveyard, because you can see there's a lot of expansion only results and there's also a lot of expedition results that end up in this space, in the behavioral space. So this to me are failed optimization runs or bad parameter sets. Somehow these all fall into a very small space in CLIPS perception. So this was kind of, these are the failure modes of our runs. So there was some compute wasted on all these dots, sadly. And yeah, that's the gist of it. The too long didn't listen. If this was too long and you didn't listen, is that we came up with a search algorithm called expedition and expansion, and it combines semantically grounded, goal-driven expeditions to pierce through the unexplored spaces of our behavioral space, And then we use a more traditional novelty search expansion to fill in these gaps and explore in the local neighborhood. And the idea here is that we achieve both diffusive, short-range exploration with long-range driven exploration strategies that can also adapt over time. And so with that, I want to say thank you for listening, to my colleagues for putting this paper together, with special thanks to Gauthier and Cedric on the last minute touches on the paper, as well as my institute for sending me here. So thank you very much.